The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here. Welcome to another episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. On today's show, we're going to go inside the tools that MSPs use every day, not just what they do, but how they solve real business problems and they create real opportunities for MSPs. Today, we're going to be talking about what many might be aware of, and it's going to be talking about the future lifecycle issues. And we're going to get into some of the reality of the implications that come from it. And, ultimately today's episode is really important because things are coming up very quickly for those on-prem SharePoint clients that you might have. Microsoft is extended or has extended support for SharePoint 2016 and 2019 until July of 2026, which if we look at our clocks, I know it's just January, but it's going to be here before we know it. So this, of course, means no more security updates, no more non-security updates, no assisted support, and that changes the risk profile overnight. And for MSPs, this isn't just a patching conversation. It really is business risk, and that's what we got to focus on with our clients. We got to talk about the security concern. And honestly, it's a major opportunity if handled the right way. So joining me today, we have Mr. Colin Hogg and Ramiro Millan from MoveBot. We're going to go ahead and bring them in. There we go. How you doing today, gentlemen?
Yeah, good, Dan. Great to see you again.
It's good to see you as well. Dan.
Nice to see you again, Dan.
Great to see you guys both here today. And we're talking about the month of January that we're in. Before we know it, it's going to be another J month, which is July, which is a critical time frame, right?
Oh yeah. People have until the 14th of July, which when you think about it, there's a whole holiday in there already, right? So it's going to be MSPs are going to be really busy on that week off the 4th of July, moving clients over. But there is a holiday coming up. And as you mentioned, SharePoint is essentially coming to an end on-prem, and they have to make a choice, right? Which is either upgrade to SharePoint Server Subscription Edition, or do what everybody's really doing, which is move to SharePoint Online, which is the most sensible out of the two, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And so we're gonna dive into this, and we're gonna talk about what's actually happening in 2026, and more of the ins and outs of that. What options MSPs have in presenting this to clients, and how you can essentially turn this into a repeatable, profitable migration motion instead of it being a fire drill. And of course, none of us like fire drills. We want to do our best to work with our clients, to educate them in advance. So if you haven't had these conversations with those clients that, have this opportunity in front of them, now is really the time. Clients do expect us to be, to have their back, to be able to make sure that they have the amount of time that's needed, especially for large opportunities. In fact, before we got started, we were talking a bit about, a client that you guys are working with that, has a lot of clients out there with on-prem SharePoint. And, and none of this just happens with a flip of a switch. Although you guys are, making it a bit easier, quite a bit easier for them during this process. So let's go ahead and jump in and kick things off. Let's start at the foundation. So, when Microsoft says end support for SharePoint 2016 and 2019 in July, what does this actually mean in practical terms for MSPs and their clients?
Yeah, I think basically that's really forcing that choice for the MSPs and the clients, as we talked about, to either move to subscription model on the exchange side, or what probably most people are heading towards, that SharePoint Online, assuming that they're staying within the SharePoint ecosystem. So that as you talked about, increases those risks for the customers. So I think Ramiro was just on a call prior to this podcast that you might want to talk about there, Ramiro.
Yeah. It's actually like sometimes, I always wonder, are we really living in a simulation, Dan? Because like this, you can't make this up. So earlier today, I was on a call with a client. He said, I got about 50 to 60 clients that need to come off of SharePoint and then move on. And they're moving onto online because cost benefit just makes sense for them. None of these are huge companies and none of them really have any restrictions as to why they have to keep data on-prem. But they've essentially thrown in the towel and said, okay, the end line's coming. We have to make a decision and let's just go online, right? They've held out. And this is just 56. I'm sure there's tons. I don't know the exact number, but I heard something like 14% of SharePoint clients, which is a big number, are still running on-prem, which is a crazy number. Speaking of January 14th, we're exactly 7 months away, TikTok, right? As we move forward. So, it's the 12th today. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. But so almost, we're just over 7 months away. So even less.
Yeah, no. And, like I say, it feels, we're almost at the middle of the month of January and it feels like we were just watching the ball drop and, so time does fly. And we do know that things take time for our clients. We'll talk about some of that, that planning aspects of it. But, just because we go to them, have a conversation doesn't mean that, immediately that they're just going to say, all right, go ahead and do it. There's, the whole decision-making process. I mean, of course, they have to do it, right? But, sometimes even though it's a forced decision, they still are going to take their time to make that decision, right? Just because it's just how we are is part of that human nature and how we're wired. And just a little bit of follow-up too, when we talk about the risks, what risks do you see that MSPs are underestimating when it comes to clients, deciding to stay put?
Oof, there's a lot of reasons. The risk is that they're going to basically be on their own, right? Microsoft's a great company, but they're a big company. So they've made this choice very carefully and came up with this date very carefully. I'm sure there's probably 100-page documents drafted by their lawyers as to why it is this particular day, but they will be on the 15th on their own, right? And that poses a big challenge, specifically by the nature of SharePoint, right? If we go way back, SharePoint originally was designed to be something completely different than what it actually evolved to. And people put all sorts of things, like very simple images to very classified documents, in SharePoint. So lots of customers will be left on their own with very sensitive data or just a bunch of GIFs. But nonetheless, they will be on their own. And that's, from an MSP perspective, that's not a good place for your clients. That's not a good place to be. And it'll be tough, I think, for MSPs to actually convince people that they really need to do this like right now, right?
Yeah, and and let's talk a little bit about you mentioned that that conversation that you just had earlier before this call, with having 50 to 60 clients. I mean, we're talking about MSPs being faced with this decision, with multiple clients all at one time. Hey, it's one thing if you've got a few clients and that are just straggling out there, that's one thing, but when you start adding, you got multiple clients and each of them might have different levels of complexity. How should they think about guiding their customers or clients between on-prem with SharePoint Server, subscription edition versus modernizing to SharePoint Online?
Well, so this is kind of where our tool, and I know Colin said a few things, but our tool actually makes it really easy to actually get all that permissions and get all that structure back over into online. So that'll make the migration easier for them. So essentially, they should feel comfortable. Like from the user's perspective, they really shouldn't see that much of a huge change. Now, with that said, it is a very good opportunity to clean out your SharePoint environment, because if if it's on-prem, it's been sitting there for a long time. So if you can go ahead and actually figure out how to clean up and not drag that same junk from your on-prem to your online, that will also save times. And for customers, that's actually a time saver, because we are physically moving data. Moving data takes time. So if we can reduce what's being sent over and clean it up, why not? And you start, because you're basically starting with a fresh version, right? Whether you go to a subscription base or whether you really do the online, which is what most people are doing either way. So it's a
Right.
good time to do that. So from an MSP perspective, it's a good position for them to actually clean up, fix permissions, fix all that while they move clients online, and not drag that, that's so to the next system. Colin,
Yeah,
you're gonna say
you don't
something?
want to you don't want to move everything from the one kitchen junk drawer to another junk drawer in the kitchen, right? You want to kind of clean that out and and have it be more organized and be much more efficient for them. And Colin, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to back up what Ramiro was saying there. It's a great opportunity to probably get a couple of pilot customer and your users on, so that they're familiar with SharePoint Online, what that looks like. And it's from a strategy perspective, if you bring those early adopters in, get them within the organization. Now, like the customer Ramiro was talking about, they will probably have small customers out of that 50 or 60, and there are some larger ones, but probably a fairly standardized approach is get some trailblazers on that are actually going to understand the SharePoint Online environment.
Right.
They are going to help with that onboarding of new users within that organization as well, because whilst the data is going to move, the data will be the same in the SharePoint Online environment. The way that they interact with that data is going to change slightly, so there's probably a little bit of an onboarding process so that needs to be done, and you get those pilot users across first, and in part of that process with those pilot users, you get an idea of what that data looks like. You can help with that decision of cleaning out the junk from one kitchen drawer to another type thing. I love that analogy. I'm thinking about my own kitchen drawer at home. Yeah, and the permission to who can actually go into that kitchen drawer as well. Does everybody need to dump their stuff in there?
Right.
So it's a great opportunity to do that, and we're talking about the whole process here, but from MoveBot's perspective, you're able to run at that time, you're able to run a scan on that the on-prem environment, figure out what that data looks like, and that may help when deciding what to bring across, what's useful to bring across, and so on. So part of that, get a couple of the pilot users across, and then you run a scan and establish the scope of the project, if you like.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Yeah. While you're at it, clean up some long file paths, get rid of those invalid characters. SharePoint loves those characters, right? But like funny, if going back to the kitchen drawer, the junk drawer situation, if I could get up around, run to my kitchen and come back, I literally bought a bright colored box cutter, because when Amazon comes like every day to do when they come to check on us every day to make sure we're still alive, right?
Yeah.
I could never find the box cutter because it was black. So I finally just gave up and bought this brand new,
awesome.
like purple one that I could easily find. But it's
Right.
the same thing, right? It's really the same thing. If you got to be migrating your data over, there's going to be stuff hidden in there that hasn't been touched. There could be large files. It could be, gigabyte-sized files in there, especially, if you're kind of like an engineering firm, right? Think of that use case. Well, these documents are massive. These CAD documents are huge. Like, do you really need them all? Can you archive them? Can you maybe, and we can do this with MoveBot. We could take and maybe put that into like a deep storage, like maybe through Amazon, something like a deep freeze, and just keep that stuff that hasn't been touched in years and forever, and then move the more important stuff to SharePoint. So there's a lot of value. What I really like, and not because it's our product, is you can also do this in the background, right? You don't have to sit there and monitor and watch it. MoveBot will just retry and try to move these files over, and then if it fails, it'll just provide you a report as to what happened. But the good news is that it can do this without being babysat. So, and that's one of the reasons this particular MSP customer of ours is interested, because they can actually do this and deploy it across multiple different of their customers and not sit there and watch it, right? So that's a very important thing for them, as they have to move 50 to 60 clients.
Yeah, and I think there is a ton of value in that cleanup process, and you're helping them through that. I mean, because let's face it, out of sight, out of mind. When we've moved from a physical physical file cabinet where you can only put so much in it. The drawers aren't closing, and you're pulling stuff out, and you're getting rid of things, and When we moved to online, you have roughly an infinite amount of space, and you essentially just keep loading it, and there's stuff in there that is so old it's just not needed. But I want to talk a little bit about that. Kind of that migration playbook methodology. One thing MSPs consistently ask for is predictability. I want to walk through, have you walk us through your recommendation, in your playbook, from that very first discovery conversation through the final cutover and sign off. Of course, you got access, plan, pilot, migrate, optimize, and why this is all having a structured approach. Things are important and so on. So can we jump a little bit into that and that aspect?
Sure. Certainly key thing is knowing what it is that you're going to be moving, and also figuring out some of the limitations. If there's going to be some rate limits and things like that that may be applied. Slightly lesser because we manage those, but fundamentally, you run, when you can run this discovery scan, and actually on the SharePoint on-prem environment. Now, that's going to, when you do that, it also sets up you're going to install an agent. That agent is then going to run and connect to that server. So you initially overcome a couple of technical capability concerns right from the offset of actually being able to run that scan. So we can connect to the source. We can then run that scan. We can then establish the data set that sits there. What does that look like? And then you can have that. That gives the MSPs the real information to go back and say, hey, you're looking at 100 gig, you're looking at 2 terabytes, whatever the data set is, and then they can go ahead and set expectations with their customers of how long that will take. For rules of thumb, if you like, MoveBot will typically move between 2 and 500 gig of data per day from a SharePoint on-prem environment into SharePoint Online. So you can then say, okay, well, this project is going to take X amount of time. Some people may say, okay, we've got 2 terabytes of data, 500 gig a day, it's going to take me 4 days. It's probably going to be a little bit longer than that, because you're going to have conversations with the client about things. You're going to, there may be potentially some rate limiting set in there, and so on. But at least from a project scoping perspective, you can again go back and say, hey, this is how long it's going to take, and this is how much it's going to cost. Yeah. So that's really straightforward. And then, as Ramiro says, the beauty of when you actually start that transfer, the actual moving things across, you can set that up, and you don't have to monitor it and babysit it. Right. And then at the end, there will be errors. It's expected that there's going to be errors in a migration, and the reporting is there, but also the mitigation is from that cutover perspective. You can rerun those errors. You can run a delta. There'll be probably some new data if the customer's still working in the old SharePoint until we do that cutover. We pick all that up with either rerun of errors and then a final delta before the cutover. So we can make the process really smooth. But I think, as we've talked about right from the very beginning, it's January now. It's July when there's this changeover. We really don't want to be, doing all this, starting all this on the 1st of July, for several thousand customers. We don't want, ideally, the whole process can hopefully start for those 14% that haven't moved over. They could start moving across and work. We can help the MSPs do that in a really predictable fashion, basically.
Yeah, and like you said, migrations do have that reputation for going sideways for a variety of reasons, and things can break down. How does MoveBot help MSPs de-risk those problem areas?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we've got great reporting. So, you will see we're 100% transparent about those issues and whatever. Because the worst thing that can happen in this environment is you migrate the data sometime in August or September. The customer will come back and says, "Hey, where's my accounting file?" Or
Right.
"Where's my where's Ramiro's expenses?" Oh, it's all right, we forgot those. Yeah. And you go, "Hey, we didn't migrate it. It didn't come across." That's a terrible situation to be in, because now you're in a situation, you've got an old platform that's not supported anymore, and data that's missing. So the way that we really mitigate that is being 100% transparent with the reporting, and actually having what we call a delta migration usually solves all issues. And if it doesn't, you're still left to know maybe we've got to move that file manually for some obscure reason. We're not able to do it. It's a very rare case, but in most instances it's really straightforward to do. So that's kind of how we get the back clear reporting and then this delta migration.
Yeah. And if we have any MSPs watching that are interested in, like, from our perspective, our trials are very, very open and clear, right? You can literally, you have full access to the product. And it's a good way to actually do a pilot migration with your clients, right? So if you have, again, 50, 60 clients, or 5 or 2 or 1, you can do a pilot migration, right? You can set up, you can look at a site, maybe 1 or 2 libraries, right? Configure MoveBot to do a configuration, run the migration, do some validation to ensure my expense report made it over, right? And then Colin's expense report also makes it over. Look at the, permissions, and then look at your exit criteria, right? What's the error count? Is it less than 2%? Okay, it looks pretty good. You can do all of that to get business approval, and you can do all that with our trial, right? We won't bug you. In fact, we're here to help you, and we can give you, some additional transfer, a few gigabytes or whatever that's required in order for you to run this pilot migration and really understand that our product, like Colin said, provides you the reporting transparency that you need to get that business approval to move forward with the bigger stack. But you can do that while it's already configured, and then all you really have to do is either provide us PO, credit card, or just send me cash, and then we can turn it on for you, right? And then you can just continue doing what you're doing. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really the deadline isn't the problem, but waiting is a problem. And so now is the time. And, and for our listeners out there, there is a practical way to get started without guessing. MoveBot does offer that, free SharePoint readiness scan and proof of concept migration. So you can, test this with a real client scenario before committing to a full project. And so for our listeners that do want to check that out, they can email sales@movebot.io, correct? As well as you can go ahead and visit admin.movebot.io/register. It is a mouthful, but if you are watching, you can see on the ticker there where you can go to. And any final words, Colin or Ramiro, that you want to share for our audience?
I think just don't delay. Jump in, get started. Let us help you.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, I would say that.
Go ahead, Ramiro.
I would say TikTok. I know it sounds so cliche, but the time will fly by. It will fly by. And the customers will delay and delay and delay. So it's the time is unfortunately now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the MSPs that will win will be the ones that start the conversation early. Simplify the decision for your clients. You just make it easy for them. Execute on those migrations with confidence. Use the right tool to make that happen. And with that being said, I want to thank everybody for listening to us today. Colin and Ramiro, I want to thank you both for being here. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.